Just a couple of months into his tenure, and Chris Armas has already delivered Toronto FC Champions League football. Probably wasn't how he drew it up, nor how any of us wanted to get to that point, but we'll discuss Toronto FC being awarded Canada's berth in the 2021 CONCACAF Champions League on this week's edition of Waking the Red Weekly, presented by Footy Talks. My name is Mitchell Tierney. We'll also touch on Toronto FC's COVID situation, the first few games of 2021, and plenty more. Alex Gangue-Ruzic of Between the Sticks, Vancouver, is the guest on this week's show. He'll fill us in on wild offseason for the Whitecaps, a lot going on there, as well as the Olympic qualifying for Canada as well. Jeffrey P. Nesker, Michael Singh, how you guys doing this week?
I'm good, Mitch. I'm good. And like you said, Armas doesn't even need to play games, man. He just delivers. Just a winning coach. Let's go.
I have one question as we start, gentlemen. Mm-hmm. What color is North London right now? What color is it?
Mitch said 10th place.
That's not a color. North London is red.
Speaking of that,
anyway, there we go.
Speaking of that, did you guys see that Bleacher Report tweet with it used
We the North one?
We the North one.
Yeah.
Like, what? Come on. That's some serious copyright infringement. No, that's questionable.
Hey, I was about to play Sweet Caroline and do Ian Wright's dance before you guys told me that maybe wasn't a good idea. So copyright isn't my forte today.
Yeah. Some concerning tweets from the Toronto Raptors as well, suggesting they might be Liverpool fans. So I don't know who tweeted that or what happened, but I assume we'll see some cleaning house at the Raptors pretty soon. And it has nothing to do with them being 10th in the standings either. But before we clown on Jeff too much, we do have to give him his due. He was right. The 2020 now. I guess 2021, it's technically 2020 Canadian Champions final is postponed. And, the CSA announcing that, the fact that it was supposed to initially be played before the CONCACAF Champions League. Toronto FC, of course, as we mentioned off the top, awarded the berth. The game supposedly will still be played in Hamilton as, pandemic restrictions allow. We would assume that comes with fans because it wouldn't really make sense for Toronto FC to be able to travel back if that's not the case. It's not a win-win, but it's not a lose-lose either, I think, at the end of the day. And it seems like at least the clubs themselves publicly are happy with how this situation turned out. It's not ideal for anyone, but what is right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I was going to say, what is ideal? The Canadian Championship, it's a trophy in its own. It's a final in its own, but it's also, this year in particular, a very special opportunity to showcase the best in Canada soccer. And this past year, it's been Forge FC and Toronto FC. And I think that they got the call right to postpone the game, especially, given Hamilton the game because they gave up that Champions League spot. Credit to both teams for finding a solution to this. And I still think there is a victory here for Forge because let's say hypothetically they had to go play that March 20th game on less than a week of training against Toronto FC, who were already the overwhelming favorites. I doubt that game goes very well for Forge. Even if it does, and 2 weeks later you're playing Club Leon in Mexico. And that's an even greater test, you can argue. So for a team that hasn't really had preseason, it just doesn't make sense to send them there into this tournament. But that being said, like I said off the bat, this is an opportunity now for Forge to really showcase what that they have. And they have time to prepare. They have the time to do it in front of fans. They have time to make this a grand spectacle. And I think for me, that's a win for Canadian soccer based on where it was. Let's take baby steps before we start taking giant leaps. Forge, you need to conquer MLS teams before we get into the Champions League and start having that discussion. I mean, Forge couldn't even really conquer CONCACAF or the what is it?
That's a tongue twister. CONCACAF. Say that 3 times fast. Yeah. I mean, I'm just pleased that I've got the time now to figure out which Forge jersey and which TFC jersey I'm going to cut in half and then sew together as my
priorities
to wear and not sit in any section. I'm gonna have to sit. I'm gonna have to be a section upon myself at Tim Hortons at that game. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah, I suppose the one I mean, there's a couple of unfortunate things, but one of the unfortunate things for Toronto FC, of course, is now how do they prepare for this game? This would have been kind of a built-in opportunity for them to, again, that kind of sounds bad from a Forge perspective. I don't mean necessarily we were giving this game to Toronto FC, but if they were to get to that Leon game, they would have had at least one game under their belt and a decently competitive one. So now it's probably about figuring out what they can do in preseason. We know the last time they played in Mexico at altitude, they had and this is what Will Dunn's suggesting in a question. Any chance Toronto FC can forfeit the first game and take a 1-0 result? I think it's a 3-0 loss for any sort of forfeit in soccer. So I mean, I don't think that's something Toronto FC is gonna want to do. I think it's probably better to go in there and play the match, even from so many perspectives. But it'll be interesting to see how they start this preseason and what they have planned for that in preparation of this game, because obviously they will want to do as much of that as they can. The one thing that does help them, of course, they're going to lose some players to national team duty, but those players will also be in Florida. So from that perspective, it's not the worst case scenario.
No, and that's exactly why they decided to go down to Florida in the first place. And to build off your original point there, and what sort of, I guess, preseason matches Toronto FC will have. I mean, we've heard Montreal, and I do believe something will happen there before TFC head to Mexico and face Club Leon. We've heard that they're willing to help out as much as they can. Obviously, this week or last week, I guess, put things aside and made things a little bit more difficult. But that being said, Montreal's also going to be based out of Florida, so I wouldn't be surprised to see both teams perhaps head down there a little bit before, get in a preseason game, and then TFC head to Mexico and take it on. So keep an eye out for that. I'm excited, man. I'm excited. There's nothing else to say other than the fact that we're finally getting there, man. We're finally getting to these games, and we talk about the Canadian soccer schedule that's coming up. Guys, prepare, because there's going to be a bunch of footy around the corner. It's something we've been starved of and deprived of for like the last 3 months.
Well, TFC footy, but I mean, in terms of footy, I've watched more soccer over the last year than I have in my entire life outside of it. We talked about this last week, and I wanted a bit of clarification. I'm sort of keeping a side sheet of notes about stuff that we mentioned that later I'm like, I don't quite understand. When we were talking about 10 days prep, both of you were like, that's not enough time. And well, I agree with you. I just want some clarification. How is 10 days not enough time to prepare for a game? I mean, video sessions, just getting up to a certain level of match fitness with repeated training sessions. Like, you have to imagine that in a perfect world, 10 days isn't going to be chock-a-block with training sessions 24/7. So I'm just wondering, why the response was so unanimous between you that 10 days wasn't enough time to prepare.
If this was mid-season and there was a break and you have a 10-day break in between games, sure. But these are guys who haven't, sure, they've done their off-season regimen, but there's no replacing actual games action and no replacing the work that you have to do to get into that level. And especially when you're at the highest level in soccer in Canada, there's an expectation for how fit you have to be. And for me, there's no possible way of getting your sharpness back, your touches back, your match fitness back, being asked to do whatever there's just no way to get that back within a week. Because then you got to give them a day of rest or two before the game itself. So you cut that down to 8 days, and that's really tough. Can you go outside right now, start running, doing laps, whatever, and can you get fit in a week?
You're asking me? I mean, maybe is this animated or real life? I'm not sure, but what kind of montage music do we? Yeah, exactly. If you give me a montage, I can be fit in 2 minutes.
I think we need to film that segment. But realistically, though, if you're gonna go, let's say you run 2 kilometers every day, whatever.
Yeah.
Are you gonna upgrade that to 4 kilometers in a week? I think that's a stretch. That's a very big stretch, and if you you got to put that in perspective for a professional soccer player. And for me, that's just, you need more time than that.
Okay, I got you.
Let alone all the tactics side of everything, and unless you're doing this 24 hours without sleeping, I don't see a way where you fit everything in.
Yeah, it's 4 kilometers with Chris Mavinga sliding at your ankles, so that has to be considered in as well.
But I mean, wouldn't 10 days just make you more scared of Chris Mavinga sliding at your ankles? Like there would be an argument that, I'd rather just go in cold and lose my ankles than like dread about it for 10 days and then lose my ankles anyway. So I don't know. I like to hit things sideways, and I appreciate the clarification, because to me it just seemed like it was a bit it just seemed a bit of an exaggeration. Like, oh my God, if we don't have 10 days, the world's going to stop spinning on its axis. And I was like, 10 days? Like, what do you need 10 days for? Like, anyway, but I appreciate the answer.
Like the MLS regular season, that starts April 17th. Preseason's already kicked off for every club there. So they've gotten over a month to prepare for the regular season, not even a championship game. So I guess that gives a little bit more perspective, just how much time teams need to get ready.
Yeah, let's get into Toronto FC's preseason preparations a little bit, because as we know, they were hampered, and more information on that coming out this week from Canadian Press's Neil Davidson. Toronto FC back in training yesterday, which is a positive, but there were 9 cases of the virus reported among players and staff. Everyone's feeling well, but obviously, that needs to continue to be monitored before they can head down to Florida and figure out that whole situation. One interesting note that Neil Davidson did report that, that stood out to me was Toronto FC might actually be able to get their vaccines, and probably the same with the Montreal Impact, and potentially the Vancouver Whitecaps as well, just because of Florida and the way they're doing their vaccine rollout, and how you can potentially get a vaccine as a tourist next month in Florida. So, in Toronto FC, the situation might actually improve for Toronto FC once they get down to Florida. But obviously something that has been delaying Toronto FC's preparation of late.
It's the world we live in right now. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, there were inklings on the Twitter machine, that people had an issue with TFC, jumping the queue to get vaxxed, but I don't have a problem with this. I mean, they, if anybody, they're frontline workers. They're almost essential frontline workers, and they're taking risks. So why wouldn't they, be up for vaccination? Certainly, it would be in the best interest of MLS to sort this all out before the season begins. It's just one more variable to knock off. No one's suggesting that it will immediately go back to full fans and stands and, cellies with that are just, glorified hugs.
Tell that to the UFC.
Well, I mean,
if we're April 24th, full stadium. Full capacity.
We work on different in different worlds.
That's an entirely different planet. So
that's hilarious. And there's one thing about the vaccination that you make a good point there, Jeff, but I think it's also crucial to point out, as Mitch said, they won't be jumping the line really in Florida. They fall under the guidelines of the people who are allowed to get the vaccinations. So I mean, we can go back and forth and debate this stuff over and over. It's going to come down to the player itself and their personal standpoint of how they feel they should get the vaccination. We just hope that, like, if they do get it, they'll be safe, right? And that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. They don't have to deal with anything COVID related like they've been going through at training camp. And I don't know if they would have been able to get in that March 20th date because of these COVID cases. Right. So I think that's another important thing to highlight. I know a lot of people, I mean, Canada Soccer's press release put essentially I don't want to say blame, but, faulted almost Forge for not returning to training. I mean, Toronto FC also played a role in this too, because you can't schedule a game when one team can't play it, and let alone another team's not training. So I think there's two sides to that, even though Forge obviously took the fall a little bit there.
Yeah. And I think, with the vaccination, obviously you're hoping that, obviously in Florida, the healthcare workers and the vulnerable people will have been vaccinated first. But to the point with athletes, right? Like we know that this virus can cause issues with the lung. It can cause issues with the heart. So we've seen professional athletes who have had that sort of thing, as much as, for example, us, right? Like generally healthy people, lung issues would suck, but they're not going to mess with what I do professionally. For an athlete, obviously, that immediately has a major impact on what you're doing professionally. So that's obviously, you know, we want the important people out of the way first, but then athletes should certainly, I think, be considered at least a higher tier than, you know, Gen Pop, just for that.
Without question. And you know, I take umbrage with people that disagree with that, because they've put themselves on the line for our entertainment, and then to you know, it's a valid excuse. So I think that's all I'll say on that. Yeah,
and Alex is here, so we'll bring him on and get some Whitecaps and Canadian Olympic talk here, as a busy time coming up for both of those teams. Now joined by Alexandre Gangue-Ruzic,
look at that,
editor-in-chief Between the Sticks Vancouver, covers Whitecaps, national team, CanPL, basically all things Canadian soccer. Alex, great to have you on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to hop on with you guys and chat. I think a lot to talk about this week. So much going on in the soccer world. So I'm excited just to chat about all that, especially the Canadian national team and a bit of Whitecaps, of course.
I'm just going to call you Alex, if that's okay. I'm not going to try and pronounce it like Mitch did. I don't think I can pull it off. If anything, I'll just butcher it. So we're just going to go with Alex from here on out.
yeah. Alex is the way to go. Absolutely.
Did I get it, or did I butcher it as well?
You honestly nailed it. I mean, the amount of times, like the awkward conversations I have in Zooms, especially in school, where they kind of look at my name and it's just kind of Alexandre. Like, I think the other day I heard like 4 different pronunciations within like a 20-minute period. I'm like, maybe I should just put Alex, but I also kind of like the struggle.
So get it out right now. How do you pronounce your name?
Alexandre Gangue. Technically Ruzic, because it's like, you know, Eastern European, but Ruzic passes.
No. I want to know the OG. How do you say it? Let's go. One word.
Ruzic. Alexandre Gangue-Ruzic. That will be the correct.
I love it.
All right, Pulisic.
I love it.
Maybe not Pulisic.
All right, let's get into things here, because as you said, we do have a lot to talk about coming up for all the teams you cover. But let's start with the Canadian Olympic team. You know, their roster was released last week. You know, probably not the team everyone was hoping for, but still a pretty solid squad. And obviously from your perspective, a lot of Whitecaps as well. What were your thoughts on the roster as a whole?
Well, that's it. It was always going to be a tough roster, especially when the Toronto FC COVID cases came down, because obviously Chris Armas had mentioned that he might not have been able to release all of his players, or at least not willing to, but there was still likely going to be maybe a Noble Okello, maybe if Canada was really lucky, a Liam Fraser or Ralph Priso. Those all could have been very useful names in the midfield, where Canada's probably the weakest at the moment. But elsewhere in the squad, they've got a solid back line. They've got plenty of competition in goal, and they have some pretty good forwards to throw in the mix. I mean, just the Whitecaps players themselves. Derek Cornelius is a massive get. I mean, personally, I think he's probably the best center back in the first team, like in terms of form the last year. So the fact that he's playing for the U23s is huge. Zachary Broguier was pretty good last year for Montreal, probably one of the best right backs in the whole Canadian pool. So again, a big get. And then you got guys like Theo Bair. He's been ready for MLS minutes. He needs more MLS minutes. So I think this could be a big opportunity for him to kickstart his 2021 season as a whole. And then you look at the Canadian squad, what I find very interesting is that there's a good mix of veteran players. You look at someone like Aiden Daniels, you might not expect much from him, but former TFC guy, he's got over 100 USL appearances. That cannot be understated how important that is in a tournament like this, where you look at the other teams in their group, they're loaded with veteran players who play a lot in their domestic leagues, and Canada hasn't always had that in the past. So I think that could give them an advantage in a short tournament like this.
Shout out Aiden Daniels, former TFC Academy product, of course. You sort of mentioned it there off the bat of the TFC players, and they're going to be missing. Canada obviously hasn't qualified for the Olympics since 1986, I think it was.
I think 84.
84?
Yeah, it was 84.
Ridiculous. Either way, ridiculous. How much is this team going to be missing those TFC players when you think of the likes of like Jaded Nelson, even Shaquille Marshall-Rudy, and Ralph Priso, especially in like the midfield? How much is this Canada team going to be missing that? And do you think that affects the end result potentially?
I mean, you mentioned the midfield. It's key because I look at someone like Ralph Priso. He could have been a very good transitional piece in the midfield because when you have such good defenders and a good front line, your worry is how do you get the ball between them, and that's usually midfielders. I mean, Michael Baldico, I didn't mention him earlier. He's going to be massive for Canada. What he showed last year in a small sample size for the Whitecaps, he's going to be playing a lot for Canada. I think that's a good thing because there's not a lot of what he brings on the roster. Having a guy like Priso or Liam Fraser, if he was available, they could have remedied a lot of those, I guess, that burden that will be put on Baldissimo. So I think the midfield is the biggest part of what you're probably missing with no TFC there. But that's just the reality of this tournament. You look around, technically, Canada has an excellent crop of U23 players, but with this being a non-mandatory FIFA tournament, clubs don't have to release their players. I mean, in an ideal world, you got Jonathan David and Alfonso Davies down in Mexico tearing it up, but that was never going to happen. And then you look even just around Europe. I think one example is Harry Paton. He plays over in Europe, and Mauro Biello really wanted him. He's a midfielder. He could have added a lot to Canada's team, and his club team was like, no, we don't want to send him over because we need him. And he didn't even end up playing on the weekend. So they say that, and they don't even end up playing him, which sucks. So that's just the reality of this tournament. TFC or not, there is always going to be important players missing. So it's just finding the guys that will come and they can put in a shift from you. And with the 20-man squad, it's just such a unique tournament because you're looking for players that can kind of offer a bit of this, a bit of that at different positions, since you're not always getting your full squad anyway. So I think the TFC absences certainly suck, but I do think Canada can make up for it in other ways.
Which kind of segues into my first question, which is, do you see a lot of change in this roster if we actually manage to qualify for the tournament?
I imagine a lot of these guys will be there in the Olympics. It's tough to say because I guess theoretically Canada could load up and go for it again, bring in those aforementioned names like Davies and David, but it ultimately depends on clubs. With European club seasons starting late in summer, some teams might be willing to give up their players, some don't. But the big issue with that is the World Cup qualifiers in June. Canada is definitely going to load up for those because those are massive games. They want to make the World Cup. And I mean, there's also a Gold Cup. Personally, I think between the two, if they make the Olympics, they should probably go for the Olympics just because it's rare. It's every 4 years. Players would prefer that. But just with the timing of World Cup qualifiers in June, a Gold Cup in July, and then the Olympics late July, early August, there's just so much football for Canada to have to manage, potentially having upwards, if my math is correct, 60 players total, because there's around 20-man squads for each. Do you get enough players? You're not getting players going to all three. No way in this busy club climate. Like, they're not going to release their players. So I imagine, I guess, a handful of guys will probably stay, but ultimately it's just going to be kind of get who you can and then see from there. And maybe you get 3 decent overagers, because obviously that'll be allowed if they make it to the Olympics. Fingers crossed for that, but too early to tell.
Yeah.
Right.
Just a quick follow-up. I've read a few articles that have pointed to the potential for this roster to really go for wide play in terms of the attack. And I'm wondering if you agree with that assessment.
I think that's a perfect assessment. You start at the fullbacks. I think Zorhan Basang and Zachary Bourguier are 2 very good attacking fullbacks. We've seen that Basang with Canada, also in Europe when he played for Bruges. And then obviously I think now for Montreal, we're going to see a lot of that. Bourguier, again, known quantity. Even someone like Marcus Cadinho, the same. And then you look at the wingers. There's just a lot of intriguing options, and there's also a few wild cards there. I think you start with Tajon Buchanan. He knows how to take those guys on in 1v1 areas, as you guys know, as a fellow Toronto man, as we'll say. And then he's going to have to be huge because his form last year, Canada's going to lean heavily on him. And then another guy is kind of maybe flying under the radar is Chris Tordek, who's playing over in Poland. He's probably one of the most match fit players in the tournament, because he's played, I think, 12 games in Polish's top division, which that's no feat. Some of these guys, I think Balu Tabla is another example. He's only played 12 games in the last 24 months. So obviously we all know the potential he brings. He's probably going to have to start as a super sub. But you got guys like Tordek who are in form, Buchanan who are in form, and then even some wild cards again, like Ryan Raposo off of the bench. He could also be an option. You got Charles Andreas Brim can slide on the wings. I think they're going to really focus their play down the wings, and then maybe you try to filter balls to a guy like Theo Bair who can finish in the air, finish on the ground, and latch onto those chances.
That's exciting. That's super exciting because you don't usually see an emphasis on wide play in under 24 tournaments. So it could be a really interesting tactical wrinkle, but it could also be a massive disaster. So we'll just have to stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on for sure. And just moving on there, you pretty much mentioned like the whole roster so far. What I want to ask, and this is really Olympics, especially Olympic qualifying, it's a chance for a bunch of youngsters to get those minutes and to perhaps make a name for themselves, further make a name for themselves for some of them. Name me 3 guys that you believe will break out in this tournament, if you can.
Ooh. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a great one. Put him on the spot, Mike.
Right on the spot. No preparation whatsoever. Go.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. This tournament, as I've kind of researched and learned more about, as I've kind of dove into the roster, while obviously the goal as a collective is make the Olympics, just these group of players, they have so much to want to accomplish personally that I could see a lot of players coming here with a chip on their shoulder in particular. They want to break out. They could use this as an opportunity. I'll start in goal. I mean, I have no idea who's going to win the Sebastian Breza, James Pantemis battle, but I'd say one player to watch is Pantemis because already he's 24. He's been a hot prospect for years now. I think he has 8 call-ups to the senior team alone, and he's never played. So I think for him, he might come in extra motivated. He'll want to win the starting spot. He'll probably play a game or two. They might end up just platooning it to start and then running with the hot hand if they make it to that famous win and you're in semifinals. So I'd say James Pantemis, he's in the mix for the Montreal starting job as well. Clément Diop, his spot isn't as all secure as they expect. They got rid of Evan Bush, so it's really Pantemis versus Diop. I think Pantemis could be one to watch for that reason. Looking elsewhere on the roster, I'd say maybe Zorhan Basang. I thought he was excellent back in 2020 at the national team Camp Poutine. He was one of the standouts. No one had heard of him. He flew on the radar. He was excellent. He was stuffing stats. I think he was putting up like a ton of tackles, a ton of dribbles, a ton of key passes a game at the fullback position. Heading into it, he hasn't played in a year because his time at Cercle Bruges didn't end the way he wanted to. He ended up being a free agent, and that's how Montreal signed him. I think he has a lot to prove. So I'd say maybe Zorhan Basang, so 2 Montreal players to start. And then lastly, I'll say someone like Theo Bair up top. I'll rock the Vancouver pick because we've seen it in Vancouver. He has massive potential. He knows how to get into those goal-scoring areas. He just hasn't gotten the minutes. He hasn't gotten the chances. So hopefully in a tournament like this, he gets those chances that he maybe didn't always get in Vancouver last year, and he can get in the goals because he's going to need to be a central figure because if Canada doesn't score goals, they're not going to give their defense the run support they need. And I think if they do, that's kind of a good recipe for success. You get 1 or 2 goals. You get those 1-2-0 wins, 2-1 wins. Those are the games that win you tournaments. It might not be pretty football, but it wins you tournaments. And I guess in terms of honorable mentions, Michael Baldisimo, of course, we know what he could bring. Someone like, again, Balu Tabla, he's just such a wild card. If he gets into form and starts doing what he can do, he could end up being an explosive piece off the bench.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very interesting to watch how, like you said, all these factors considered together. The COVID factor one as well. There's been some rumors out of Canada camp that potentially they have a positive case again, which would add another wrench into all of this. You can make replacements up until the start of the first game if there's an injury or obviously COVID-related situation. I know they traveled down there with a couple extra guys from CanPL. So we'll see if any replacements end up being made. That's something to consider as well as we head into this first game on Friday. But I did want to transition things a little bit into the Whitecaps because it has been such an interesting offseason for them. Bringing in multiple players on loan as well as signings. How much do you think this team's improved, and where do they still need to improve, and why is it number 10?
They've been busy.
That's it. They've been splashing the cash this offseason, even dating back to last offseason. It's just typically it's not something you're used to from the Whitecaps. I think since the start of 2019, obviously at the end of 2018, they sold Alphonso Davies, but they're up to nearly $20 million of cash splashed on a multitude of players, and you go across the board. And this offseason in particular, they spent $4 million on Caio Alexandre of Botafogo. They also spent $2.5 million on Daiber Caicedo of Cali down in Colombia. Two young money players, as they're famously called. So they're, I guess, DPs of sorts, special DPs of sorts, and then Bruno Gaspar on loan. Those three players were targeted very specifically for one reason, and one reason primarily, and that's to transition the ball forward. The Whitecaps last year, they struggled at getting the ball forward to their attackers, and it just hurt them in a multitude of ways because, firstly, when you're not getting your attackers the ball, you're not going to score many goals. So you have to defend a lot. Not all teams can handle that, and the Whitecaps didn't do a great job of handling it last year. They bled chances by all the advanced metrics, by all the normal metrics. Any way you cut it, they were bleeding chances. They weren't scoring enough goals. It's not a recipe for success unless you have difference makers up top and, I guess, a rock solid defense. And in MLS, not many teams have that. This was doomed to happen. So they've rectified some of that. They've gotten the ball, players who can get the ball forward. And I think that's going to make a big difference just in terms of how they defend and how they attack. I mean, there's still missing piece, like Mitch hinted at. They need a number 10 in the attack to kind of get their strikers the ball, get someone like Lucas Cavallini the chances he desperately needs to score 10, 15, 20 goals, as we all know he could in the right circumstances. But just getting the ball more up the field is gonna help, because while the number 10 will offer that final product, if you can still create a lot of chances by getting up the field, and I think with a guy like Bruno Gaspar at fullback, along with Ali Adnan, that gives the Whitecaps two of arguably the best attacking fullbacks in the league. That allows them to play, say, a Liverpool-esque style where they're throwing their fullbacks forward, they're dropping a midfielder back in compensation, and they're just pressing teams more. They're pushing themselves on teams more instead of just kind of sitting back and letting the play happen, because as we've seen for the last 2 years, they're just not really built to play that way.
Richie Laryea has something to say about that claim.
I want to talk.
I was going to say the left back. I don't know if Toronto's got the left back to match, so I just say the fullback pairs. But I agree, Richie Laryea is one heck of a player.
Not Justin Morrow's music. I'm sorry.
Hey, we might see Richie at left back. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I want to talk about my favorite Vancouver Whitecap, and that is Tosaint Ricketts. We love him over here on the East Coast, and I'm just wondering how the West Coast is taken to our boy Toss.
Oh no, he's been great here. Uncle Toss, as he certainly is to some
Uncle
players.
Toss.
He's been a great mentor for a guy like Theo Bair at striker. They're Theo's mentioned on multiple occasions that he really relies on what Ricketts offers him in terms of mentorship. Because I mean, you talk about his career, he's seen it all. You hear stories, you see your stories of crazy initiations in Turkey, not getting paid, and all. He's just had such a weird resume that his experience has been so valuable off the field. I mean, on the field, he can still bring a lot in his minutes. He presses. He's 33, runs like he's 25, which is always a good asset to have. He knows how to get in the goals. I think he scored 2 goals in like limited minutes last year, and even same the year before. He knows how to score goals.
Oh,
he's kind of been the perfect depth sub, and it's kind of like what he was for TFC a few years ago when they won the MLS Cup. He's just depth. He's leadership, and that's been perfect for the Whitecaps because they're such a young team. They had an average age of like around 23 years last year, which was the youngest team in the league. And the only reason they're not the youngest team in the league this year is because of Montreal's very, how do I say, wholehearted attempts to try and beat their claim to being the youngest teams. So
just signing all those young players.
Yeah, they've been signing everyone under the sun who's been under 22 and whatnot. So a guy like Tosaint Ricketts, he's kind of the elder voice in that room. I think he's one of the only 2 or 3 players over the age of 30. He's been a massive voice, and hopefully he gets a lot of minutes this year. With there being international duty, Cavallini's due for a few trips away to join Canada. Ditto with Theo Bair. Tosaint Ricketts might get a few minutes, and as we saw last year, you can always trust him to give you an honest shift. That's what I like about him. You put him up top, you know what you're going to get. He showed that in games. I think LA Galaxy last year, lockdown, shutdown, etc. When he scored the winning goal in a 1-0 win, he was exactly that. He got a surprise start. Everyone's like, kind of, what is he doing up top? He ran his butt off for 80 minutes, got a deserved goal. It just he brings a good atmosphere to this team, and that's just important to have on a young roster.
Absolutely. We love him. We miss him sometimes. But I also love Patrick Mullins, so I'm kind of torn. But
well, before I let you go, Alex, I did want to ask one last question, which is
I have one more after. Go ahead.
All right, fair enough. But I did want to ask about the Whitecaps, and you touched on it, the Whitecaps young player situation, because we on the show a lot of times hype up Toronto FC's young guns, and I think for good reason. But honestly, looking at the Whitecaps and some of the young guys they have coming up, it's maybe they don't have the high end talent of like a Jaquil Marshall-Ruti right now, but there's a lot of good young players working their way through the Whitecaps system, I believe. So who are some of those guys that you're looking at this year that you think might take that step forward and really be contributors for the team?
Well, I think you have to start with Baldissimo and Bear. I think they're still young players. Baldissimo's a 2000 born, Bear's a 99 born. They're still relatively young, and they're ready for a bigger step. They've shown that they can hang at the MLS level, so obviously you have to be excited for them. I think someone who could step up more is Damiano Pachele. He made his debut last year. I think he played about 5 seconds in the last game of the MLS season. So, I mean, at least he got to kind of put a bit of a 5 seconds played on his resume. Hopefully he gets to increase that decently this year, because I think he's only 17 or 18. He played for U17 Canada World Cup, I think 2 years ago. He's got a lot of talent. He can kind of be an interesting number 6, number 8-esque piece in the midfield who can move the ball around. I think I'm curious to see what happens with Gianfranco Facchinieri. He's a young center back, and center backs bloom later, so there's no rush for him. But they loaned him to Ottawa last year for the CPL season, and he played really well as an 18-year-old against professionals. So maybe he ends up sticking around with the Whitecaps with the likes of Cornelius missing out on international duty. It's possible someone like Ranko Veselinovic also misses some time. They might need a guy like Gianfranco Facchinieri to step up. And then lastly, I think the guy to watch in goal is Thomas Hasal, because he came out of nowhere last year, and he was the third keeper to start the year. He pushed his way up. He got his chance kind of through luck at MLS's back, and he just took it and ran with it. Mm-hmm. He was good to the point where they've cleared out the other goalkeepers they had last year. It's kind of Crepeau versus Hasal in goal. I think Crepeau should win that battle, but again, he's going to be away for national team duty. He's Canada's number 2 guy. They're going to call him up whenever possible. That leaves Hasal. That's a pretty good backup option for the Whitecaps to have. He's doing great, making great progress under goalkeeper coach Yusuf Daha. There's been European interest in him. I think he could be someone, if he gets the right minutes, he can end up thriving, especially if the Whitecaps end up defending better, because that did wear on him. He kind of, his stats dropped as the year went along, but as a 21-year-old rookie, you're not going to fault him too much for that. So I'm expecting big things from him this year when he does get his chance.
Nice. And yay,
nice.
we're all about freeing the young guns here. So we're all about that sort of content. And what I want to ask is, you're not you definitely follow TFC, and you're not an outsider by any means, but just from your perspective, what are you making of this Toronto FC offseason, with in particular the lack of moves that Toronto FC have made? I just wanted to get your take on that from a little bit of an outsider perspective.
Well, it's interesting. It's such a mixed bag, because on one hand, you can't count out teams with pedigree in MLS. It's just a reality. MLS experience is, for better or for worse, a valuable commodity for many reasons. And you look at the roster TFC has, they have that in abundance. You do wonder, did they didn't get some of the top end guys they would have wanted. I mean, who knows what's going on with Boré, why that's been their lone pursuit, why they haven't maybe considered other options, since that hasn't always been the best option. Sorry for the ambulances going by here.
No, it's not. It was perfectly timed. It's like Boré, alert klaxon. Breaking news. What do you know that we don't?
It's semi-relevant to all that. And then, the new coach situation, I think that could either fall flat on its face. I just think, I look at Toronto FC, I wouldn't be surprised to see them take a step back. Ultimately, I can't count them out until I see them on the field. honestly, I think the Champions League might be more of a curse than a blessing, just because when you're not that fit, your roster isn't really complete. You've got a new coach. The last thing you want to do is go play at Leon, who again are like I think the champions of Mexico at last year's Apertura or Clausura. Maybe if it was like a Guatemalan side or a smaller team, you're able to ease it. No, you're going right into the Lions' Den in Champions League. Maybe if you come out and win, it's a legendary story. But realistically, worst case scenario, there's going to be a lot of injuries. Their form is going to suffer. That'll play a big role on their season, especially when you're going away from home like the Whitecaps in Montreal are. But what I see from TFC is obviously I think they'll be able to compete. They have the roster to compete as is, but they do need to make some additions badly. And I just think the way that things are trending to start the season, a bad start could be on the horizon. And as we see with teams, it's really hard to dig out of those bad starts. So I'm not seeing a supporter shield-esque season like last year where they came out strong and they kind of kept that momentum. But maybe if things go well, they can kind of hover and make it in the playoffs. And then from there, as we've seen in the past, they make do some damage, but they're going to have to really overcome this tough start to the season. It's not going to be easy for them whatsoever.
Why did we ask the Whitecaps guy about TFC again?
Sorry to damper enthusiasm.
No, I love it, man. I want to hear some different takes on it, because sometimes we can get almost in this sort of cloud of just we're inside the bubble and we want to know what's going on a little bit outside and what other teams are thinking about Toronto FC, and it's interesting to hear those thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah,
speak for yourself, Pally. It's on first game versus the Whitecaps.
You've ruined Jeff's day, but I think the rest of us appreciate you coming on the show.
I'm just gonna look at my Arsenal talk and remember the weekend and
all the Whitecaps and Canadian national team knowledge you brought. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Definitely awesome. Have you on. Maybe towards that, what is it, April 24th when the two sides meet in Orlando? So
yeah. I'm gonna open with bad season, huh? So Champions League, huh?
Yeah, hopefully they don't go and smoke Leon and make me eat my words.
All right, but yeah, thanks so much, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as we did mention with Alex, we do have the first couple dates for Toronto FC's season. That being 17th against Montreal Impact at Fort Lauderdale. Miami Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and then traveling across Florida to Orlando Exploria Stadium for their home opener, the first home opener outside of Toronto in Toronto FC's history. I think they played one at the Rogers Center, so it's not the first one, not at BMO, but I remember
what's the
Robert
Rogers
Earnshaw
Center
doing flips.
The Sky Dome?
Are you talking about? Yeah, you're talking about the Sky Dome, right?
Yeah, sorry. All right. I'm trying to get us some corporate sponsorship here, all right? But we now at least know. We know when Toronto FC's first game is going to be, and we know when their first two MLS games are going to be, so we can start building towards that.
Absolutely.
Getting started right away with a derby. And I like that, A lot of times we see TFC, especially in the past, start off maybe on the West Coast. Some are a little bit warmer, so they don't have to play games. And obviously they can accomplish both now that no one's playing in Canada. So I'm all for it. Let's get this derby underway right away. I want to see this new look Montreal side with Laurent Simon on the touchline, and I want to see that their new coach too. It's really exciting for both sides. Both teams have new coaches, and I wonder how much weight they'll put on this rivalry, because in the past, those games got heated.
Oh, they always come out for a derby game, always.
Yeah.
So I'd be surprised if they didn't. It might be a slow start just because the first couple games in MLS were slow start games, but I have faith that we'll get some quality footy eventually, maybe even in the second half.
Yeah, there'll be enough players on both sides. I think that we'll remember.
Speaking of faith.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, just speaking of faith, we had that story yesterday that came up about MLSC moving sort of one step closer to allowing fans back into the stadium. And the one thing I'm bringing that up is because I want to highlight the fact that TFC, we emphasized it on the show last week, but TFC emphasized that they had that them staying in Florida was contingent on borders reopening. So, we see some positive news again about, the MLSC taking that step to opening back Scotiabank Arena, getting things back to normal operations. And BMO Field has to be right in line with there, if not ahead of that, because obviously they're an open environment. So I guess what I'm getting at is, hey, there's a chance. There's a chance, gentlemen.
Yeah.
There's a chance this summer that we see the Reds back at BMO Field and perhaps with fans in the stadium. So that's, again, a lot more than we could say even 3 months ago, man. And I'm just, things are starting to turn the corner, and hopefully they're on the right way up.
Yeah. I almost wonder that, and the other explanation, probably the real explanation, is that they just didn't have places figured out where they're going to play yet, and they had to figure that situation out. But I almost wonder if there was a plan to do a kind of mini MLS Canadian thing again, just considering Toronto FC's first couple fixtures of the season.
Yeah, that definitely was a bit of a surprise. I was like, oh, we're doing this again, but we're doing this south now. You know?
We're doing it in Florida. I wonder if that was in consideration, but
I imagine it was. But Champions League, I'll have to put a dent in that. And I think that's the biggest reason why, because TFC have to go to Mexico and then they can't come back in quarantine for 14 days, right? And then you also have the return leg for the Champions League, which can't be played in Canada because people visiting Canada would have to quarantine for 14 days. So a team from Mexico would have to come chill for 14 days, which obviously is unfeasible.
They're not going to do that.
So that's probably more likely why TSC started off in Florida. Hopefully the border situation with what's going on there, that gets resolved sooner rather than later. And I think as soon as that does, I don't see any reason why we can't see TFC footy back in Toronto.
Yeah. And we said the first couple of games are Champions League and then of course the MLS games after that. But we actually lied. Toronto FC have a big game this weekend. Hopefully multiple big games in the MLS Cup. Our boy Phil B.
I was like, scrimmages that I can't watch.
What do you know? No. Phil B. He's qualified for the tournament. He's going to play the last chance winner in the first quarterfinal on Saturday. Semifinals go that day as well, and then the final on Sunday. So, it's pretty easy to watch. It's Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, MLS website. There's no excuses why you can't get out and watch, the club in action, which is awesome. Obviously we've talked to him on this show before. We know what, representing this club means to him, and we know what this tournament means to him certainly as well.
Yeah,
and we've also seen the kits, which are awful.
Yeah, they're not great. They're not.
No, they ain't great. No,
they're
sir,
not
they're
great.
not very good.
But this
do they all have to wear them, or do they still wear their team kits?
They're going to wear their team kits, I'd imagine. Okay. But
Jeff, they're for charity.
Oh.
Jeff and charity.
My kryptonite. Me and charity just. Anyway,
Jeff hates charity. No, but obviously this one is the big one for Phil. And he told us all the way back, and when we had him, I think it was January or February, when he was previewing the League Series 1, the first event of the year. And right off the bat, he mentioned the EMS Cup, and this is the big one that he wanted to win. So he did his part, what he had to do. He finished 5th at, I think, out of 26 or 27 teams in the regular season. And now he's earned a bye onto that quarterfinals, where, again, as Mitch said, he'll face the last chance winner, whoever wins that bracket. So exciting thing for Phil, exciting news, good thing to look out for. And also, if he does win that match, hypothetically, and he wins this quarterfinal match, he'll move on to the semifinals, where he'll face the guy who's won the first two. No, the guy, essentially the guy who's won the first 2 events this year, and that's Diddy of New York City FC. So, hey, it's an uphill battle, but this is what he's here for. This is why he wants to compete, and he wants to be the best. So to be the best, you have to beat the best. And if he can get past, that first round matchup, and if he pulls some magic off in those semifinals, I don't see any reason why not. Once you're in, anything can happen. And we're rooting for you, Phil, this weekend to bring some money home. I think they're playing for $40,000 US, which is that's some pretty impressive money to play.
It's like 100,000 Canadian.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, easily 100,000 Canadian. My goodness.
The exchange rate, yeah. But what I will add to that is that this league is growing so much. I mean, 40,000 is the biggest prize pool ever. They're the most teams ever competing, and viewership numbers for FIFA and EMLS is record viewership numbers. So
they got jerseys.
Or
for
trending
charity.
upwards, and they got kind of like jerseys, but but yeah.
Oh, do you hate
up.
charity, Mike? What the hell, Mike? Mike hates charity.
Write the headline.
Will brought up an interesting scoop, which we haven't mentioned, which is last I checked, Lyon does have a league match 2 days before the CONCACAF Champions League game. Not sure if it was mentioned. It wasn't. But still, Lyon is a heavy favorite, I would think, given the form. He's correct in that. They're in mid-season form, but that is an interesting wrinkle that they do have a domestic match 2 days before they face off against TFC. So, move a couple karma points over to the TFC column, back to the TFC column.
Yeah.
Great
We've
shit.
seen this before, though.
Yeah.
They usually just, play a reserve roster. Or, I don't know where they are in the table. We'll do all this research ahead of next week's.
Are they going to besmirch us that bad? Are they actually going to field a B side against us?
No, I meant a B side probably in the league game. Like I remember. Chivas,
okay, good.
I think it's Chivas. In the week before they played Toronto FC in the CONCACAF final in 2018. Chivas is the club where they like number you based on your rank within the club. So they're running out guys with like triple digit numbers in the league game before the Champions League final. This is like the reserves. So
that was TFC in 2018.
Yeah,
like,
I remember
that roster that they threw out against. Yeah, Houston.
Yeah. Agar Keche and like his cousins.
Julian Dunn's only appearance ever for Toronto
Mariano
FC was in that game.
That game was a steaming pile of bad, but
I wouldn't put too much weight into that. Them having a game a couple of days before, just because, as Mitch said, they're probably not going to play their strongest side.
Yeah, they're going to rotate their squads. Yeah, that makes sense.
Another point I wanted to make is, at least last season, every time it seemed like TFC took a break and then came back, they were flying. They were playing some fantastic footy. And I remember, like, the games that I'm thinking of is, first of all, the MLS is back tournament, and the first game was against DC United, where they played an outstanding 80 minutes. Outstanding. Probably one of the best 80 minutes I've seen them play. And then obviously the last 10 minutes happened.
Games don't end at 80 minutes. Yeah.
And then they followed that up with playing Montreal. And we know what happened in that game with Ayo Akinola. And then there was another break where TFC returned home for the Canadian set of games. And the first game that they played out of that break was against the Vancouver Whitecaps. And if you remember that game, they won 3-0, and I think that was still TFC's best performance of the season. That was the game where Pablo Piatti scored that absolute screamer.
You are forgetting the last time they went back home, prior to, I guess it was decision day, when they had a week break, and then they came back, and it all fell apart. So it was. I think.
A week is like. That's not really what I was more thinking, like a month off, like in between games, like a significant amount of time. Like a week is just like a bye week, and I don't really put too much weight on that. But obviously anything can still happen. We have a new coach, we have probably new systems. It's going to be a new TFC this season, so anything can happen.
That could be a benefit.
What do we think? What are our predictions for Club Lyon?
Well, let's get to that next week, I think, because we'll have maybe more information, more. Even a couple weeks. I don't know. We have a couple shows here where we need to drag out this Club Lyon thing. But
I don't think we need to drag anything out because, man, there's going to be so much footy coming up.
That's fair. Yeah. At one point I did want to make too is that might be a benefit for Toronto FC, because Toronto FC is going to have all kinds of tape on Club Lyon. Nobody's got any tape on Toronto FC. New coach.
That's a lot of new players.
Very good
point.
We don't know we don't know what this team's gonna look like this season. So good luck to Club Lyon trying to figure that out.
That's a sick point, Mitch. That's a really, really good shout. Like, because Jeff, obviously,
did you like that point?
I did like that point. Well, because now that we need 10 days to prepare for single matches, right? You got to imagine not having videotapes to watch is really gonna cut down that 10 days, and they're just gonna be sitting around. Ordering DoorDash. So.
Seething somewhere that we said you need 10 days to prepare for a match.
I'll do it in 2. Yeah, exactly.
But to be fair, like Michael said, we got so much coming up here. I mean, Canada plays El Salvador Friday. Phil B's playing on Saturday. I'm calling it. Phil B's playing on Sunday.
Let's go.
Canada's playing Haiti on Monday. So we got a weekend full of action coming up. So excited. We should probably wrap up the show there, though. But as we said, a lot to look forward to. Alex getting us prepped for it, both in terms of the Whitecaps and it's always interesting around the Whitecaps, but they've certainly added some more interesting pieces this year as well. So excited to see what they're up to. The national team as well. Obviously, the senior men's national team will get into gear probably coming up next week as well. We'll have extensive coverage of that on Waking the Red as well. If you enjoyed this week's show, head over to iTunes, give us a rating and a review. That'll help us a bunch in terms of more people tuning in. But to the people that have, thank you so much for all the continued support. We really enjoy doing this, and obviously, now we're gonna have games to talk about, so it's only gonna get better from here. So, on behalf of Jeff and Michael, thanks so much for joining the show this week, and until next Tuesday.